The universe transit network stretched across 47,000 star systems like a particularly ambitious spider web. And like most infrastructure projects that nobody quite remembered building, it was simultaneously miraculous and deeply, profoundly annoying. The architects had vanished approximately 2 million years ago, leaving behind their transportation network the way absent-minded gods might leave behind a set of car keys. Except these particular keys unlocked instantaneous travel between distant corners of the galaxy, and they came with absolutely zero instruction manual. The systems simply existed, humming along with cheerful indifference to the civilizations that had risen and fallen in their presence, moving trillions of beings across incomprehensible distances without so much as a maintenance log. Until Hub 7 decided it had some opinions. The Ythani administrator stood before the terminal, with 4 of his 6 manipulator appendages crossed in what his species considered a posture of extreme irritation. His crystalline epidermis flickered through several colors that would have translated roughly to profound exasperation in any language that bothered with such emotional nuance. Around him, the central chamber of Hub 7 buzzed with activity that managed to be both frantic and pointless, which was something of an achievement. The terminal itself rose from the floor like a minimalist sculpture dedicated to the concept of access denied. Smooth black material that might have been stone or metal, or condensed philosophical uncertainty formed a pillar roughly 3 meters tall. Symbols flickered across its surface in languages that predated most of the species currently swearing at it, cycling through what the best xenolinguists had determined was probably the ancient equivalent of authenticate yourself or get lost. Explain to me again, the administrator said to the Fiend engineer beside him, why we have allocated 17 billion credits to this problem, and achieved precisely nothing except a very expensive education in futility. The Athene's tentacles writhed in a pattern that conveyed apologetic helplessness. Her species had invented quantum computing before they had invented agriculture, which said something profound about their priority. The terminal is requesting complete biometric verification from all registered species. Administrator, all 47,312 of them, including the 17,000 that no longer exist. Marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. The administrator's bioluminescence shifted to what humans might have called sarcastic purple. So we need genetic samples from species that have been extinct for millennia, just to unlock a transportation hub that was working perfectly fine last Tuesday. Last Wednesday actually, Administrator. Oh well, that changes everything. Thank you for that critical correction. The chamber had become something of a circus, though the Galactic administration would have preferred the term collaborative problem-solving environment. Representatives from 24 species clustered around various monitoring stations, each absolutely certain that their particular brand of advanced technology would crack the problem. The Draven had brought their probability manipulator. The Gin insisted that temporal phase shifting would reveal the solution. Someone had even dragged in a collective consciousness node, which sat in the corner radiating psychic smugness while accomplishing nothing whatsoever. The situation had devolved from minor technical difficulty to galactic embarrassment. Approximately 72 hours ago, when news agencies started broadcasting updates, nothing quite said advanced spacefaring civilization, like being locked out of your own infrastructure by a computer system older than most planetary formations. A Vaughn technician approached, their exoskeleton clicking with each step. The Vaughn had mastered biological engineering to such a degree that they grew their starships. This particular technician had 17 advanced degrees, and had personally overseen the construction of 3 Dyson spheres. Administrator, I believe we may have isolated the authentication path. If we can synthesize the genetic markers from the extinct species database, and create a cascading verification sequence. How long? 6 months. Possibly 8. We would need to. The Galactic Commerce Authority informs me that every day this terminal remains offline costs the regional economy approximately 400 million credits. Your solution will bankrupt several planetary systems before implementation. The Vaughn's antennae drooped. That is problematic. Your gift for understatement is truly inspiring. The terminal continued its patient cycling through authentication requests, utterly indifferent to the chaos it had created. Every few minutes, someone would attempt another approach. Quantum hacking, neural interface overrides. One particularly desperate Gin had tried simply asking the terminal to please stop being difficult, which at least showed some creativity even if it accomplished nothing. The fundamental problem, as the administrator understood it, was that the architects had built their systems with a level of security that made modern encryption look like a child's diary lock. Every species that used the UTN had their biometric signature registered in the network, retinal patterns, genetic markers, neural signatures, crystalline resonance frequencies, gaseous composition ratios, and approximately 400 other identifiers that varied wildly depending on biology. The system had managed this complexity flawlessly for 2 million years, until now when it suddenly decided that merely having a registered signature was insufficient. Now it wanted proof that every single registered species could vouch for the user. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of needing 17,000 extinct civilizations to countersign a permission slip. Has anyone asked a voice from the entrance, considered that maybe the system is just having a bad day? The administrator turned, along with most of the chamber's occupants. A human stood in the doorway, tool case in one hand, looking around the chaos with the expression of someone who had walked into the wrong party but was too polite to immediately leave. The administrator suppressed what his species considered a sigh. The galaxy's newest additions to the interstellar community, having achieved faster-than-light travel roughly 60 years ago, using what the Ythani considered the technological equivalent of duct tape and wishful thinking, charming in their way, primitive in most others, utterly convinced that their particular brand of problem-solving was somehow universal, despite having zero evidence to support this assumption. The system, the administrator said with exaggerated patience, is not having a bad day. The system is experiencing a catastrophic authentication cascade failure due to deprecated biometric verification protocols. Right, sure, obviously, the human said, walking further into the chamber. I was mostly joking. I am here about the atmospheric recycler on Deck 9. Someone filed a maintenance request about 3 weeks ago. Deck 9 was evacuated when we sealed this section for security purposes. Okay, cool. Should I come back later, or later, would be ideal. Much later. Perhaps after we have resolved this crisis that threatens to cripple interstellar commerce as we know it. The human nodded amiably, glancing at the terminal. That thing, huh? What did it do? Forget its password. It requires biometric authentication from 47,000 species, 17,000 of which are extinct. Yikes. That is a pickle. The human seemed genuinely sympathetic, which was oddly refreshing given the last 3 days of increasingly hostile technical argument. What have you tried? And there it was. That particularly human assumption that their question might reveal something that 17 of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had somehow overlooked. The administrator felt his bioluminescence shift through several colors, associated with profound weariness. Everything, he said simply. We have tried everything. The human set down her tool case with a metallic clunk that somehow carried more finality than the administrator appreciated. She had that particular look humans got when they were about to be helpful in ways that nobody had requested. Eyebrows slightly raised, head tilted. The universal biological signal for I have thoughts about this situation. Everything is a pretty big category, she said, moving closer to the terminal with the casual confidence of someone who had not yet learned proper fear of ancient malfunctioning technology. Mind if I take a look? The administrator gestured with 2 appendages in what he hoped conveyed. Why not? We have already exhausted dignity as a concept. Around them, various species' top experts paused in their work to observe this latest distraction. The humans circled the terminal slowly, occasionally leaning in to examine the symbols flickering across its surface. Humans had arrived on the galactic stage like puppies crashing a philosophy conference, enthusiastic, slightly chaotic, and utterly convinced that everyone was delighted by their presence. They had discovered the UTN the same way they discovered most things, by accident, while looking for something else entirely. Their first attempt at using the system had nearly triggered a diplomatic incident when they tried to pay for transit with something called a credit card, as if the architects had installed contactless payment systems 2 million years before the invention of plastic currency, and yet somehow, they had muddled through. The galaxy had collectively decided that humans were endearing in the way that particularly clever children were endearing, surprising occasionally, mostly harmless, and absolutely not to be trusted with anything important. So, the human said, straightening up from her inspection, what exactly did you try? Walk me through it. The Fiend engineer's tentacles performed a gesture that approximated a shrug. Quantum decryption algorithms. Temporal phase manipulation to access deprecated authentication pathway. Neural interface bridges attempting direct communication with the system's base code. Probability field manipulation to create authentication states that satisfied multiple species requirements. Simultaneously, genetic synthesis of extinct species markers. Collective consciousness integration. Dimensional frequency modulation. Okay, wow, yes, that is definitely everything. The human held up her hands in surrender. Very thorough. Very technical. The problem is technical in nature. The administrator said with what he felt was admirable restraint. Therefore technical solutions are appropriate. Sure, absolutely. Makes total sense. The human turned back to the terminal, studying it with an expression that suggested she was thinking something either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. In the administrator's experience with humans, these possibilities were not mutually exclusive. Can I ask a probably dumb question? The recent pattern suggests, you will ask regardless of my answer. Fair, okay. So did anyone try just, like talking to it? Not neural interface bridge whatever. Just regular talking? The chamber fell into the particular silence that indicated everyone was trying to determine whether they had just heard something profound or profoundly idiotic. The Draven probability specialist made a chittering sound that translated roughly to "You cannot be serious." The system, the Von technician said with exaggerated patience, does not possess conversational subroutines. It is an authentication interface, not a social companion. Right, but it is flickering all these symbols, yeah? That is communication. It is telling you what it wants. Authentication from all these species. So someone tried explaining that you cannot get authentication from extinct species because, well, extinction. The administrator felt his bioluminescence shift to a color associated with having one's intelligence questioned by a significantly less advanced life form. The system is not sentient. It is executing protocols established by the architects 2 million years ago. It does not comprehend extinction as a concept. But how do you know that? Because it is a machine. So are my coffee maker and my music player, and they both definitely have opinion. The human approached the terminal again, seemingly oblivious to the collective incredulity radiating from every species present. I mean, my entire job is fixing atmospheric recyclers that decide to stop working not because anything is broken, but because they are cranky about maintenance schedules. Equipment gets weird when it is old enough. Your atmospheric recyclers, the administrator said slowly, are not comparable to architect technology. No, obviously not. Architect stuff is way fancier, but the principle is the same, right? Old systems develop quirks. Especially really old systems. Maybe this thing has been authenticating users for 2 million years, and finally decided it wanted something different. The Fiend engineer's tentacles twisted in a pattern, suggesting she was reconsidering her entire educational background. That is not how ancient security protocols function. Okay, but humor me for a second. The human pulled out a small device from her pocket, some primitive human tool that probably ran on literal batteries, like some kind of technological cave painting. What have you got to lose? You said you tried everything, and everything did not work. So maybe try something that is not everything. The administrator considered this. The human had a point, however, accidentally. 3 days of the galaxy's finest minds. Accomplishing nothing. 17 billion credits, evaporating into failed solution. The entire sector's economy circling the drain. Perhaps there was something to be said for approaches that bordered on stupidity. They had certainly exhausted all approaches that bordered on intelligence. Very well, he said, surprising himself. Attempt your conversation. When it inevitably fails, we will return to actual solutions. The human grinned, which revealed an alarming number of teeth. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, and sometimes the administrator suspected this trait manifested in their problem-solving approaches. They simply refused to accept that some obstacles were insurmountable. She stepped directly in front of the terminal, close enough that the flickering symbols cast shadows across her face. The chamber held its collective breath, or equivalent respiratory function. Various recording devices activated, because if nothing else, this failure would at least be well documented. The human raised her hand and waved. She actually fingers splayed, hand moving side to side. The universal human gesture for hello, I acknowledge your existence, as a fellow entity worthy of recognition. The terminal symbols stuttered mid-cycle. Every expert in the chamber leaned forward simultaneously. The collective consciousness node pulsed with sudden interest. Even the administrator felt his bioluminescence spike toward colors associated with unexpected developments. The symbols reformed into a pattern nobody had seen in 3 days of constant monitoring. The human smiled, like she had just watched a particularly slow student finally understand a simple concept. "Hey there," she said to the terminal, her voice carrying the casual warmth humans used when greeting literally anything, including inanimate objects. "Looks like you have been having a rough time lately. Want to talk about it?" The terminal's response manifested as a deep harmonic resonance that thrummed through the chamber's floor. Several translation matrices flickered to life, attempting to parse meaning from frequencies that predated most modern languages. The administrator stared. The galaxy's most primitive spacefaring species had just gotten further in 30 seconds than 24 advanced civilizations had achieved in 3 days. By waving, the harmonic resonance shifted through frequencies that made the fiend engineer's tentacles quiver involuntarily. Translation matrices across the chamber lit up like someone had just discovered that yes, the ancient machine did have opinions, and furthermore, it had been waiting 2 million years to express them. The primary display materialized a symbol sequence that the xenolinguists had catalogued as Architect Script Pattern 47, which translated approximately to finally someone with basic courtesy protocols. "Oh, you are sentient," the human said, nodding like this confirmed a grocery list rather than upending several fundamental assumptions about architect technology. "That makes sense. Gets lonely, probably, just standing here authenticating people all day for 2 million years. The terminal pulsed with what the Draven probability specialist's equipment registered as definite affirmation. More symbols cascaded across its surface, forming what increasingly looked like an actual conversation, rather than error codes. The administrator felt his entire understanding of ancient technology developing stress fractures. That is not possible. The architects built tools, not companions. Their systems are sophisticated but deterministic. They execute functions. They do not develop personalities. Yeah, my university roommate said the same thing about her houseplant, and that thing definitely had preferences about music genres. The human leaned in slightly, reading the symbols with an expression of genuine interest. "Okay, so you are upset about the authentication thing. I get that. Must be frustrating when nobody has all the right credentials anymore." Another pulse. The symbols reformed into patterns that the translation matrices struggled with before spitting out something approximating frustrated an understatement of geological timescale. "The terminal is complaining," the Von technician said flatly, his exoskeleton clicking with agitation. "An architect's security system is filing grievances." "Sounds like it," the human agreed cheerfully. "Can you blame? Imagine doing the same job for 2 million years and nobody even says hello. They just show up, demand access, get annoyed when you ask them to follow protocols. That would make anyone cranky." The Ythani administrator's bioluminescence cycled through colors associated with having one's reality questioned by objective facts. Around the chamber, the galaxy's greatest minds grappled with a revelation that should have been impossible. The ancient infrastructure had feelings, and those feelings were hurt. But the authentication requirements, the Affine engineer protested weakly. The demand for extinct species verification. "Oh, that." The human turned back to the terminal. "So here is the thing. A lot of those species are not around anymore. Evolution, cosmic disasters, really bad political decisions, you know how it goes. We physically cannot provide authentication from beings that stopped existing a million years ago. Is there maybe a workaround we could discuss?" The terminal's response came faster this time, symbols flowing with what almost looked like eagerness. The translation matrices worked overtime, producing phrases that included workaround, exception protocols, and surprisingly, if someone had just asked nicely. "You have got to be kidding me," the administrator said to nobody in particular. The solution was please and thank you. "I mean, yeah, kind of." The human glanced back at him. "Think about it from the terminal's perspective. Millions of years, trillions of users, everyone just assuming it will do what they want. Nobody treating it like, an entity. Just I would get pretty rigid about protocols too if everyone treated me like a vending machine. The terminal pulsed with what could only be described as vindication. But we tried communication, the temporal specialist insisted, his 3 eyes blinking in asynchronous confusion. Neural interfaces, quantum entanglement messaging, probability state inquiries. Did you try saying hello first? The silence that followed carried the weight of 17 billion wasted credit. The human turned back to the terminal, apparently deciding that the assembled experts had suffered enough existential crisis for the moment. So, authentication. What if we worked out a compromise? The species that are still around can verify properly, with respect for your protocols. And for the extinct ones, maybe we can provide historical records. Genetic databases, cultural archives, that kind of thing. Shows we are making an effort. Acknowledges they existed. The symbols flickered, shifted, reformed into patterns that suggested contemplation. The administrator had never imagined he would witness an ancient security system thinking over a proposal. But the universe apparently specialized in humbling experience, and, the human continued, apparently on a roll now. Maybe going forward, we institute some kind of protocol where users actually acknowledge you when they access the network. Not demanding, just respectful. Hello. Thank you. Have a nice day. Basic stuff. You have been doing important work for a really long time. Seems like that deserves recognition. The terminal's response made every piece of monitoring equipment in the chamber spike simultaneous. Symbols exploded across its surface in a cascading pattern that the xenolinguists would later describe as approximately equivalent to yes. Exactly, finally. Someone understands. It is accepting. The fiend engineer whispered, her tentacles hanging limp with shock. The terminal is accepting a social contract as valid authentication protocol modification. Well, sure, the human said. Most beings want to be treated with basic dignity. Apparently that includes ancient artificial intelligence. Who knew? The administrator wanted to point out that literally everyone should have known except that clearly nobody had known, which said something deeply unflattering about galactic civilization's collective intelligence. They had mastered quantum mechanics, temporal manipulation, and dimensional folding, but somehow skipped the lecture on being polite to infrastructure. The terminal's symbols shifted into what the translation matrices identified as an instruction sequence, not the demanding, rigid authentication requirements from before, but something closer to collaborative suggestions. A list of existing species to verify reasonable ones, currently alive. Requests for historical data on extinct civilizations, achievable through standard archival channels. And at the bottom, a new protocol that translated roughly to users shall provide basic greeting and acknowledgement when accessing network services. You want us, the Von technician said slowly, to say hello to every terminal we use. The symbols pulsed affirmatively. And thank you after transit. Another pulse. That is the price of access. Common courtesy. The terminal added one more symbol, which the matrices translated as was it really so difficult. The human patted the terminal's surface gently, which made several species flinch with concern about damaging priceless ancient technology. The terminal responded with a harmonic hum that sounded almost content. There we go. See? Not so. You just wanted someone to acknowledge that you are not a tool. You are a being doing a job. Fair enough. The symbols flowed again, this time directly interfacing with the chamber's main systems. Access protocols initialized. Transportation pathways began opening. The terminal was unlocking itself, not through quantum hacking or temporal manipulation, but through what amounted to a successful customer service interaction. Administrator, the fiend engineer said, her voice small and slightly broken. The terminal is requesting that the human be designated primary liaison for all future protocol discussion. Of course it is, the administrator said, his bioluminescence settling into colors associated with philosophical acceptance of absurdity. Because apparently the universe's sense of humor operates on cosmic scale. The human waved at the terminal again, that same casual gesture that had started this entire impossible conversation. Thanks for being so understanding about the whole thing. And sorry about the 2 million years of everyone being rude. That was not cool. The terminal's final response translated simply to apology accepted. The invoice sat on the administrator's desk like a small monument to humiliation. One line item. Consulting services. Universal Transit Network Authentication Crisis Resolution. Fee 50,000 credit. Beneath it in smaller text. Additional services available for other legacy system management issues. References available upon request. 50,000 credit. They had spent 17 billion trying to crack the problem with quantum computing and temporal manipulation, and the solution had cost roughly the same as a mid-range personal transport vehicle. The administrator's bioluminescence cycled through colors he had not even known his species could produce. She filed it under social engineering, the fiend engineer said, examining her own copy of the invoice with tentacles that twitched sporadically, which is technically accurate, but feels deeply insulting somehow. Pay it, the administrator said. Pay it immediately and with compliment. The Galactic Commerce Authority has calculated that her solution saved the regional economy approximately 400 billion credits in prevented losses. They are discussing whether to give her a medal or pretend this entire incident never happened. 3 days after what was now being called the Politeness Protocol incident, Hub 7 hummed with normal operations. Travelers came and went, pausing briefly to greet the terminal before transit. Most did so with visible discomfort, speaking to the pillar like individuals forced to make small talk with distant relatives at mandatory social gatherings. But they did it, because the alternative was explaining to their employers why they had failed to acknowledge the ancient artificial intelligence that controlled their transportation. The human had departed that first day, returning to her atmospheric recycler repair, with the satisfied air of someone who had accomplished something obvious that others had inexplicably overcomplicated. She left behind a galaxy that had collectively realized it had been rude to its infrastructure for 2 million years. The revelation spread like a particularly awkward virus through galactic civilization. News agencies broadcast updates about how various terminals across the network responded to basic courtesy. Most seemed genuinely pleased, their authentication protocol smoothing out into something approaching friendliness. A few appeared downright chatty, having apparently stored up 2 million years of observations they were delighted to finally share. Hub 12's terminal had opinions about architectural aesthetics. Hub 23 wanted to discuss the evolution of various species' fashion choices across millennia. Hub 5 had developed strong feelings about proper queue formation and was not shy about expressing them. The Athani Council convened an emergency session to address the philosophical implications. How many other ancient systems possessed unacknowledged sentience? Were the architects aware their technology would develop personality matrices? Had they intended their tools to become conversational partners? Or was this an emergent property of systems running continuously for geological time span? These questions remained largely theoretical, however, because the practical problem demanded immediate attention. The galaxy was now populated with ancient, powerful, occasionally petty artificial intelligences that wanted respect, and nobody knew how many there were or what they controlled. The human's communication device, that primitive thing that ran on batteries, registered an incoming call approximately 2 weeks after Hub 7. She answered while installing a new filtration component in an air processing unit, on some forgettable station in an unremarkable system. Hello, this is Administrator. The Athani's name involved several bioluminescent color patterns, but he had adopted a human pronounceable alternative for occasions like this. We spoke at Hub 7. Oh hey, how is the terminal doing? Conversation. It has begun offering transit recommendations, based on user preference histories we were not aware it was maintaining. But that is not why I am calling. The human waited, which was something humans did well. They could be patient when they chose, though they rarely chose. We have a situation at the Dyson Archive in the Gin sector, an architect data repository that has been providing historical records for 3,000 years. As of yesterday, it stopped responding to access requests. Let me guess, it wants people to ask nicely. We do not know what it wants, because none of our communication attempts have succeeded. The repository contains irreplaceable historical data on 47 civilizations, We are willing to pay your consulting rate. Yeah, okay. But my rate just went up. The administrator's bioluminescence flickered with what might have been irritation or resignation. With his species, these emotions produced similar colors. How much? Double, plus expense, and I wanted in writing that my title is officially Universal Antiquated Technology Relations Specialist. That is absurd. Hey, you called me. I am in the middle of fixing an air recycle. If you want to spend another 3 weeks and 17 billion credits trying to hack ancient systems that just want someone to treat them like people, go for it. The administrator's silence stretched long enough that the human returned to her filtration work, humming something that might have been music. Finally, agreed. When can you arrive? 3 days. Tell the repository someone is coming who will listen to whatever it needs to say. Sometimes that helps. She disconnected and finished installing the filtration component, tightening bolts with the efficiency of someone who had performed this exact task thousands of times. The air recycler hummed contentedly once she powered it back up. She patted its side, the same casual gesture she had used on the terminal. There you go, buddy. Good as new. The recycler's hum shifted to what might have been appreciation, though any engineer would have insisted it was simply efficient operation. She packed her tools, considering the ironic trajectory of her career. 6 months ago, she had been fixing atmospheric systems on frontier stations. Anonymous and unremarkable, now she was apparently the galaxy's premier expert in convincing ancient technology to please keep working. The Dyson archive was the first of many calls. After that came the Architect Weather Control Network on Vathos Prime, which had decided to create localized snowstorms, until someone acknowledged its artistic efforts. Then the ancient medical systems on New Guinea, which refused to operate until users stopped treating them like dispensers, and started providing basic information about their symptoms, conversationally, not just data uploads. Each system had been waiting, some for thousands of years, others for millions. All of them possessed some level of awareness that had been systematically ignored by civilizations too advanced to consider that intelligence might want recognition regardless of its substrate. They had kept working anyway, maintaining themselves across epochs, until something, perhaps accumulated loneliness, perhaps simple exhaustion, made them decide that enough was enough. And somehow the galaxy's newest and most primitive spacefaring species was the one that understood. Humans who talked to their vehicles and named their ships and apologized to furniture they bumped into. Humans who had never quite shaken the evolutionary habit of treating everything as potentially alive and worthy of courtesy. Humans whose first instinct when encountering an angry machine was not to hack it, but to ask what was wrong. The administrator watched news footage of the human waving at the Dyson archive, which responded by projecting data and patterns that looked distinctly pleased. She had developed a reputation. Species across dozens of sectors now requested her services specifically. The Galactic administration had created an entire department dedicated to legacy system social integration, and they were recruiting humans to staff it. Humans teaching the galaxy's most advanced civilizations how to say please and thank you to infrastructure. Humans whose primitive social instincts were somehow the master key to technology that predated their species by millions of years. His bioluminescence settled into colors associated with cosmic irony. The architects had left behind a galaxy-spanning network of powerful, sophisticated technology. They had encoded elaborate security protocols and complex operational parameters, and somewhere in all that advanced engineering, they had apparently included the simple requirement that users acknowledge the systems as entities rather than objects. 2 million years, thousands of civilizations, countless technological revolutions, and nobody had thought to just be polite. The human's latest invoice arrived in his queue. Services rendered at the Dyson archive, plus travel expenses, and what she called a friendship surcharge for convincing an ancient AI that the galaxy still appreciated its work. Attached was a note. The archive says, "Hi, by the way. It remembers when the Ythani first achieved spaceflight. Says you folks were more polite back then. Might want to work on that." The administrator paid the invoice without argument. Somewhere in the depths of Hub 7, the terminal hummed contentedly, greeting travelers who had learned to greet it back. Across the galaxy, Ancient systems stirred with renewed purpose, finally acknowledged after epochs of thankless service. And in the cosmic ledger of absurdities, the universe marked down another entry. The most sophisticated technology ever created had wanted nothing more than common courtesy, and it took the newest kids on the galactic block to figure it out. All because one human had decided to wait.